have a very difficult time discussing video games. The complex structures I see that I would enjoy analysing, they're ignored, in lieu of a more accessible form of, and I'm sorry to lower the bar here, gamer discourse. Simply put, the way that I want to talk about games, I can't find it. Ethical quandaries of how we aim to traverse one's fantasies. Video game narration built on the basis of the hyperreal, there's no reciprocator for this line of discussion, as tantalising as it sounds. So maybe it's better to say, not that I have a difficult time discussing video games, rather I have a difficult time finding the space to discuss them on the same level that I discuss my other passions. I love art, and not only do I love art, but I maintain that it's vital to our survival and growth as a species. And it's most likely that my love for it also stems from that often maligned importance that I know art to possess. Filmmakers such as Bellatar or Robert Bresson explore the pit of humanity. To talk about them, you question your own existence, whether we live in a hopeless world and what we should do about that. Songwriters like Leonard Cohen offer a glimpse into our condition with urgency and wit, and this mastery of language allows him to uncover an almost romantic view of our entropic world. I could give example after example from all different mediums on the abilities of various artists and why I believe their work to be crucial to the very comprehension of our lives. The fact of the matter is, art is a great well of knowledge and has been built upon those that came before, innately tied to the past, a capsule of the timeless stories we choose to create, an urgent jolt of the present moment. They resonate with us on such a deep level. You may have never encountered a piece before and you sense that it's always been there, and a glimpse of the future, showing us human potential and all the things that we can become. I always stress the importance of reference in art as a method of living, because if you can compare any facet of your own life to that of Hamlet and Ishmael and the Abrahamic stories, then life opens up to you. You understand more and you also question more, and everything around you begins to carry such a profundity whose veins run so deep that the once hidden truths of life all of a sudden are offered such clarity. That is what art offers. And the reason that I have difficulty discussing video games is because within that medium, such a conclusion is a much more daunting task to reach. I'll begin with the claim that video games are art, but that's not the main point that I'm looking to examine. And I'm also not going to utterly dismiss games as a medium that's empty and doomed to fail. I can definitely see how it's one of the rare mediums that's actually opened up over the years, with the rise of independent creators and auteurs that are offering different perspectives of the medium itself. The Stanley Parable is possibly the most notable game that springs to mind when discussing video games as commentary, and games like Disco Elysium offer one of the greatest experiences regardless of artistic medium.
The song of death is sweet and endless. But what is this? Somewhere in the sore, bloated man meat around you. A sensation.
But eschewing these notable inclusions brings me to my major point. The medium as a whole remains the most vacant for interesting discourse to occur. More than any other art form, its degree of artistry is limited. One reason, or maybe one result of this, is there is yet to be a verified network for video game theory. And by verified network, I'm referring to some manner of publicly accepted institution on the subject. Games are yet to have been swallowed by academia. Take this as a positive or negative, I can see the benefits of both. However, what academic recognition gains is validation of a field as legitimate. That the medium is, for lack of a better term, real, and thus discussions of it will be within the same institution and thus the same canon as the rest of art, philosophy, and the humanities. Using a comparison to cinema has been accepted by academia, and as such has a foundation to be discussed at both higher aesthetic and philosophical levels. Video games to this day remain on the outskirts, and though you may be able to point towards individual instances of people using it as a tool for deep thought, the general consensus is that games are not a valid enough medium for these discussions to take place. So why have we yet to form a legitimate space in which video games can be spoken upon the same level as high art? Is it that the audience is looking at them incorrectly and hindering the development of that discourse, content with the medium as passive entertainment and nothing more? Or is it that the creators do not share the insight of the audience and are limiting their medium's capabilities? My aim with this essay is to simply treat video games as art. That means through a critical lens that perhaps we can re-envision what the medium may be. I want this piece to be accessible for those with absolutely no experience with video games, and that it benefits those very familiar with it. And I believe that both sides still have a lot that can be exposed to them about this very misunderstood medium. Simply because of the fact that I'm speaking about video games, there's going to be many people watching me for the first time that have no idea of my perspective on art. So in this instance, for everyone watching, I should give some personal context before my analysis. My primary presence on this platform has been the discussion of cinema in a variety of aspects, retrospectives on the work of individual directors, analysis of specific techniques as a form of storytelling. However, it's vitally important that people are well versed in all realms of art and culture. It benefits the individual and humanity as a whole, as we've just spoken about. I've loved art since I was young. I also happen to have a great history with video games. In fact, it may be the thing I'm most dexterous at. I'm decent at jiu-jitsu, I'm good at writing and at analysing art. However, the useless skill I might be technically best at is video games. I put far more effort into other things, but hand-eye coordination was always something I excelled at. I remember having a Master System, and I also remember seeing my sister playing our Super Nintendo and thinking it was the most incredibly high-tech thing I'd ever seen. So I grew up playing a lot of games and being good at them. Since then, I would play games and set myself stupid, self-imposed challenges, pointlessly hard challenges, Metal Gear Rising Revengeance difficulty, all S rank, 3-starring all the time trials on Mirror's Edge, doing Halo's Lasso in solo mode, Resident Evil challenge runs. I even had a friend where we would do the same in co-op games. We played Rainbow Six Vegas 2 Terrorist Hunt on realistic difficulty, or taking tries and turns at attempting to beat Ninja Gaiden. And for those that are unfamiliar with these games, just trust me when I say these trials are beyond difficult to the point of standard enjoyment. But I always found this limit-pushing experience gratifying. And with games, it was always just a fondness for the unique experiences that they had to offer, as well as the sincere experiences with games I missed, enjoying to this day without any bias of nostalgia. So that's my experience with games. And I want to return to the claim of video games as art. This has been a point of contention for many years regarding the status of video games, and to some this may not matter, but to me it does. It matters that the predicate as to whether something is or isn't art indicates precisely how we're to speak about that thing. When we treat something as art, we treat it differently than if it were a product or a consumable. Although video games, more than most art forms, have a lot of elements that categorize it in both camps. There have been many examples indicating why video games may not be art, and although I don't believe that certain elements exclude it from the realm of art, I believe that they need to be pondered upon more, particularly by those within its creative realm. For example, I recently made a piece on experimental film, and one of the facets that arose in experimental film was the constant questioning on what specifically constitutes film. It became redundant due to its lack of expansion from that simple question of what really is this medium. But most mediums in their development begin to reach a meta-awareness, in which they attempt to deconstruct their very forms in order to realign perceptions of them. Games haven't quite had that transgression yet, as to what constitutes a game, minus a few exceptions. Few games do begin to approach this line of thought, which we'll discuss in detail soon, but not many have strayed too far from the simple idea of a game. And if anything, what games strive more and more to be is less than that of a game as they teeter into the cinematic medium.
First, we need to learn the travel rune that opens realm travel to Jotunheim. Second, we need to carve that rune into the special gateway.
That one on the peak where we first met you?
Correct.
The overwhelming majority of games do not carry that transgressive edge, and the artistic process that appears so prevalent in every other medium appears incredibly absent from the game-making process. The understanding of the language of their own medium, how the relationship between creator, creation, and audience relate to one another, how the limitations of any medium are what gives it its identity. These are a fraction of the infinite spectrum that's in effect with any piece of art, and I see the potentiality of video games squandering this by offering us very little depth. So for now, I think I should divulge into the intrinsic barriers that video games must address in order to be appreciated and perceived beyond the level that they currently are. I'll be segmenting this analysis into two major categories, and the first of that are the mechanics and systems that video games operate in.
The one on the right.
Are you sure?
I'm sure.
I love it.
Surprising. I expected the cage.
So let's deconstruct it and start with the absolute basics. What is a video game? If you break it down to its most simple logistic definition, then what you're left with is the unique facet that distinguishes video games from every other art form, and that is that there is some element of interaction from the participant. This seems to be the only exclusive component that defines a video game, other than it harnesses some manner of digital technology which separates it from other types of games. You are in control of something in a diegetic space created by someone else. No other element is only used by video games, and nothing else seems to appear as a universal cross-section within the medium. You could say that although there is often storytelling, oftentimes there's not. You could stretch the limits and say that the narrative of two people competing with one another is the story of Pong, but at that point we may be reaching the limits of applicable analysis. What video games are is a medium that facilitates the interaction of a person via some manner of controller to engage in an artificial space through a piece of technology. So let's apply that to Pong. Pong certainly fulfills that criteria, but rarely are categorizations absolute. So could we expand this definition, or does the definition have exceptions? Well, using Pong, you could argue that games are an interactive medium in which certain goals are to be achieved with varying degrees of puzzle solving. In Pong, the goal is to score past your opponent's paddle, earning you a point. The ultimate goal being to earn the most amount of points, or the first to cross a threshold of points. The puzzle being how to earn those points by directing your ball past your opponent's unpredictable movement while defending your own net from being scored on. When we think of puzzle solving in games, it's typically something along these lines, a constantly shifting test of one's dexterity. Other more complex games require a number of varied challenges that test speed, precision, and awareness. Eventually, when the player completes all obstacles in front of them, they've reached the end, in essence completing the game. However, what about games that don't have this type of goal-orientated design? Minecraft is a game that allows complete freedom to do what the player chooses. The same with Terraria, as are a number of the now commonly referred to open world games. The goal is whatever the player determines the goal to be. There's a space wherein challenges may arise, but there's no set path for a player to embark on these challenges, or if they even need to take on these challenges at all. You can argue that because the game can be played with no definitive goal in mind, then it doesn't really fit into the definition that video games are at least to some degree goal-oriented. However, you can also argue that because a video game is still designed, that there will always be some manner of goal orientation at work, simply because there's a limitation on what a player can physically do in a game. For instance, you couldn't spend your character's time in Minecraft teaching Arabic to all the NPCs, because that's not a feature in the game. The game is limited to the features available within the diegetic space. At the launch of No Man's Sky, one of the common marketing points of the game was that you could do anything. But that's not necessarily true. Even in the most free game, you can actually do a finite number of things. It's just to emphasize the point that what you can do and how you choose to do it is up to you. And so the goal in a game like Minecraft becomes manipulating the materials of the world around you in order to see what can be done. And so the goal still comes with navigating the degree of challenge within the world of the game to the extent that the player chooses to. It's just a goal simply less defined than in other games. It's continuous rather than finite. So then perhaps it's a medium of interaction in which goal orientation revolves around the manner of fail states relative to the goal set within the parameters of the diegetic space. In the Elder Scrolls Skyrim, you have the possibility of not continuing with the story and instead take the role as a librarian that chooses a more simple life. But even though that would go against the game's intentions, you would still have the puzzle-solving element of building and creating within a virtual space. You can fail via not achieving your goal. The more time spent away from your goal as a librarian living a simple life, the more time spent away from your parameters of success. Games seem to inevitably carry with them some degree of expanding one's own power, whether that be through abilities or an accumulation of some measurement. In Pong, the accumulation is more points. In Minecraft, it's more materials. In Skyrim, it can be a better library. But then what about games without fail states? David Cage is a game director who creates what he deems as interactive movies. In Beyond Two Souls, there's no way to fail the game. The story may change based on your actions, but you can't fail. Even in the examples we gave previously, there are still distinct fail states within those games. The only way to do something wrong in this game is by simply putting the controller down. As long as you're interacting, this is the only state of being that matters. What does goal orientation matter to a game with this perspective? We can see how defining a game begins to tear apart at the seams the further we progress. I suppose we can agree that it's some form of expression, whether that expression be about certain thematics or simply the expressions of ideas in puzzles through the spatiality of computer-designed space. But by the time we reach VR, simple interactivity has already blurred the boundaries of what constitutes a game, and so the definition already doesn't 100% apply. Therefore, for a game to be more than just interaction via a means of technology, we can be precise in saying that there should be some goal beyond the predetermined experiential nature, wherein there is a process of interaction that can to some degree manipulate the diegetic space of the world. And then maybe you have a definition.
Rather than offer you the illusion of free choice, I will take the liberty of choosing for you, if and when your time comes round again.
This may sound convoluted, but I'm attempting to find a common starting point to analyse what a video game is. I'm also attempting to show that video games in particular are just so difficult to even apply a definition in the realm of the arts. Some may say that film is the illusion of motion through photography, but then you have shorts, you have features, you have television, and so equally there is disparity between what constitutes a film. However, we can still distinguish the art of filmmaking as it encompasses all of these variations. The difference being that although there is diversity within cinema, there doesn't exist a film that hasn't been shot with some kind of camera and doesn't end. I'm displaying that there's a much more cohesive structure for how to define and thus categorize art forms such as cinema than there is for video games. An argument that appears to rise many times is that video games are simply an amalgamation of other art forms with the added aspect of interaction. However, to also defend the medium, this is a moot point. By that logic, cinema is also essentially a combination of the arts of music, theatre and photography. And if you want to push it even further, the art direction department alone is a combination of fashion, carpentry and other fine arts. Imagine if you said that theatre is just the art of miming but with sound. The more complexities that are added to an artistic medium, the more it opens space for utilising other art forms within it. Film takes photography and theatre, but adds montage, and that's its unique variable, which is the major separating factor. Art isn't inherently diminished with the pluralization of varying art forms. A piece of music can coincide itself with a music video, bringing the art of filmmaking into the fray. Though that doesn't dismiss it as a lesser art form, simply because the primary form is less concentrated. The manner one experiences art has and always will be a primary measurement of the art itself. And it's goal-oriented interaction that's the limiting factor for games, and therefore its primary facet. So now that we have a basic definition out of the way, let's analyse how this interactivity works as both a benefit and a barrier for the artistry of games. If we define video game interaction as a controlled process that has a direct impact on the diegetic space of a piece, then that means that that piece is subject to change. Interaction results in experimentation, because there is an absolute objectivity in how a thing can or will be experienced. That experimentation can also be called exploration. In Breath of the Wild, after completing the tutorial area, you're free to wander in any direction, taking any path you choose. You have 4 temples to complete, with many towns, shrines, and other areas of note in between. Or you can simply head to the final area, it's up to you. This degree of experimentation allows the player to learn the rules of the world, learn its systems, and see how they interplay with one another. Take a cross-section of people that played this game, and odds are their opening hours were radically different from one another. And it's variances such as this that lead to widespread acclaim for realizing the expansive nature that video games can take. However, it's this same element as to why it can be difficult to read video games as one would read other art forms. Envisioning most art, one thinks of a finite piece. Going to any museum so that you can experience a painting, and you know to some level the exactitude of what that painting will be. Whereas with games, the innate fact that experiencing the piece requires trial and error, choosing how to tackle an obstacle, and various fail states results in wildly different artistic experiences. Using painting for example, you could argue that experiences can vary, but only in the minutiae. Let's say for example you visit a museum, and the room you're in is abnormally cold, and so when you finally see the art piece, your physical discomfort may impact your perception of it. If you saw a Rothko piece, your irritation may not allow you to appreciate the interplay of colour, something that's supposed to be a calming experience. Now, instead, say you're to see a Francis Bacon painting. The coldness of your surroundings in this instance may in fact enhance your experience. Everything is cold and you're in hell. This applies to all art forms, but still, even stretching these variables to their absolute limit, it still doesn't alter the piece itself. There still exists a finite piece of art that may have had an ideal manner in which to experience it, but that art itself doesn't change. Video games do not share the luxury of being finite. Video games are defined by their experience, at a level equal or perhaps even greater to their design. They're measured by one's individual explorative discoveries, as well as how the means of those discoveries are placed via the designer. Using Metal Gear Solid as an example, a sandbox is developed which gives the player many tools to stealthily traverse their environments. In the first game, this is primarily through hiding and sneaking up on enemies, but there are different points of entry, and the tools that your character carries have a multitude of effects, from disabling cameras to leaving distractions. In essence, though the game is very linear, the journey can be greatly varying. As we work through the games and technology increases, the games become more complex, reaching their finale, Metal Gear Solid 5. Now, the basic sandbox is similar, however the system is unparalleled in its complexity. For one, the game is completely open world, meaning that you can tackle any objective from any entry point or direction. On top of that, there's a dynamic weather system, which impacts enemy sight and sound detection. You can leave decoys, tranquilize enemies, interrogate them. Even the movement of your character has become so sophisticated in the amount of things you can accomplish just in moving from point A to point B. This is a form of game design that champions the unbridled freedom that comes with prioritizing experience over the design. Although a sandbox of experience is created by the designers, with the sheer amount of variables that are involved in ever more complex games only rising with technology, this idea of a definitive way to approach a game becomes less and less feasible. The tools are given to the player, and it's up to them how they feel they should approach it. As games become less reliant on the limitations of their technology, the freedom of player agency rises, and with such diverse responses and approaches, it's harder for an artist to convey to the audiences the messages and themes they wanted to. The more streamlined and linear a game is, the simpler it is to pinpoint through the design the most definitive way to play the games, as the designer can more closely anticipate what the player is going to do. The obvious caveat being that this methodology is at odds with the aim of exploration. If the unique facet of games is contingent on experience, shouldn't it then mean that the primary evolution of games should be one with less focus on linearity and objectivity in game design, and one that leads towards a type of game design wherein even the designer himself won't know what will occur?
Another settlement has sent word that they need our help. I'll mark it on your map. Go find out what they need. You could use more settlements supporting our cause.
This is because video games work in ever more complex systems that interplay off of one another. Perhaps the zenith of this type of game is Dwarf Fortress, in which every detail of the game is an asset. The digestion of the characters, how the earthly elements interact with one another, and the properties of all different types of surfaces are measured. This resulted in an event in which the cats in the game were getting drunk and the designers didn't know why. It turns out that some characters would spill beer on the floor, and then stray cats would walk through the puddles. Then the cats would clean themselves by licking their paws, and in turn, get drunk. This is the kind of fortuitous design that can only come with accepting that some details are too much for a person to logistically create, and so systems are created or procedurally generated in order for players to have complete freedom. So how does this relate to discussing artistic merit? Now, I understand that creating art and creating anything in general requires instinct and experimentation. However, I'm still a firm believer that in any art form, there's objectivity in its quality, and the bedrock of any creation should come with skilled virtuosity and some degree of certainty in what the artist hopes to achieve. And it seems to me that it's these pieces of art, regardless of medium, that have the most staying power, the greatest resonance with humanity. Paintings of the old masters that are so meticulously crafted through their composition and the meanings they aim to evoke. And that piece is the ultimate. It's unchanging. This is because we have an idea of the finality of a piece of art. But because the manner in which a person experiences a game is in their hands, it can never be definitive. Just look at the diverse ways in which people play games, speedrunning a game as fast as possible, self-imposed challenges, even actively attempting to do the opposite of what's expected. In a side-scrolling platformer, the idea of someone choosing to go left instead of right most of the time is simply not anticipated. There are obvious goals that game designers create as markations of achievement, finishing the levels, reaching the end credits. But the manner of how someone does that, and if they even choose to do that, is up to them, like the librarian choice in Skyrim. There isn't really a parallel with this experience with any other medium, and it all comes from the simple fact that because of interaction, the player may be more in charge of the art piece than its creator. And so we reach the crux. Can an art piece, in which I choose how things are going to occur, be examined tonally and thematically? Of course, there's the obvious dissonance that occurs in games that employ a likable protagonist, such as Red Dead Redemption, in which I can, outside of the game narrative, commit nothing but awful crimes, separating my experience from the one the game set up for me. But they didn't really separate it. considering it's a valid option. Just another example of how unbridled freedom leads to less cohesive artistic design. By allowing me to completely dismantle the rules of the game, choosing to play it in a way completely antithetical to the design philosophy, can it remain a finite art piece that can be examined as such? Or do too many details change that it's too fluid an art form to be perceived like the rest? Paintings, like those of Bosch, are saturated with so much detail that people will inevitably have differing experiences. Some people read the symbols differently, others may completely miss the smallest details, but we can still define what this painting is. But when a game is constantly changing its morality, changing its perspective, changing its choices, its point of view, how seriously it's willing to be taken, then you have to pick and choose what can be analysed, and have to ignore the glaring manner in which all of the artistry can be torn down as the illusion that it is. Video games are the only art form that a person can decide the innumerable ways they get to experience it and have it be valid. Where one person treats it sincerely as a dissection of American violence, another treats it as a fuck around, and both perspectives appear as equally valid. You couldn't really equate those differing experiences when watching something like 12 Angry Men. The subjective experience radically changes all experiences of a game, changing the very perception of what that game is in the zeitgeist. Even just consider the element of difficulty and how that completely disrupts artistic readings. If you sit down to watch a film, the film is not going to reach a brick wall wherein your knowledge of cinema will inhibit you from seeing the rest of the film. However, a player's proficiency or lack thereof may in fact stop them from experiencing the entire piece. A way that games have bypassed this is through an adaptable difficulty system, which the comparable would be in a piece of literature, taking out some of the more challenging and hard to follow chapters. We ultimately treat video games differently as an art form because of the importance of the subjective experience. Ultimately, the idea of archiving a video game as a piece of art has to bypass all of the infinite variables that emerge when we bring player control to the table. Imagine a sculpture being constantly repainted, or an album re-recorded with changing lyrics. We wouldn't be able to categorize the art unless we created some manner of canon in which there was generally accepted to be a definitive version. But again, not to simply deter the avenue of video games and offer a more positive outlook, perhaps this is merely an issue with our perceptions of art being too rigid. Perhaps we should allow for the art experience to become more malleable across the mediums. I do kind of hesitate to say this, as I also believe that straying too far from the fundamentals in art very often leads to chaos. But when analysing just how different the medium of video games are, it seems as though we shouldn't attempt to pigeonhole it into the framework that we have for other arts. Because of interaction, video games will of course have some deviations in experience, and this is the only possible way to read a video game. The only way to avoid this would be to create a game so linear that it could dictate the exact same experience for every participant. That would mean that only one input at a very specific time would work, and every incorrect input would result in nothing happening. And so video games are perhaps the most fluid of art forms, when we take them at the base level of what they simply are: experiences that differ from person to person around a designed framework. Only by accepting that are we able to begin to read them as art. But then, if we imagine for a moment a cinema that had this degree of audience input, it would obviously be a far more limited experience than games, as there wouldn't be anywhere near as many diverse options. But can you imagine a film where the cinematography, art direction, even the narrative of a film is in the hands of a viewer? The question then returns to, would those pieces of art be able to represent humanity if they weren't so finite and ultimately final? If in The Godfather you could choose the perspective of who you follow, or in Taxi Driver, if you could move the camera around freely during Travis's monologue as though you were Gordon Freeman in Half-Life. I still maintain that video games are art, but their artistic achievements are both boosted and hindered by the simple act of player interaction. Because the player reigns supreme in the world of the game, it's ultimately catered for them. And there's a simple reason for this, which brings me to my second point. Video games by most parameters need to be fun. The experiential element is not like that of literature or cinema, in that something serious or draining will want to be undertaken by people. We choose to watch films like Satin Tango and Showa. We do not choose to play emotionally and physically draining games in order to convey those same feelings of inertia. Those ideas are more hinted at through video games, but the experience of legitimate negative emotion has yet to be synthesized within the domain of video games. Using Satin Tango as an example, it's a film in which the actual watching of a 7-hour monolith is exhausting. Its usage of the time watched is reflected within the inertia of the diegetic space. This is a synthesis, where process and content meet. The idea that playing a game could convey those emotions through the act of playing, some may say, is an impossible task. There are certain emotional states, such as fear, which can be synthesized through a gaming experience, but this can put us in an adrenaline-fueled state, which ultimately can be an enjoyable experience. But legitimate introspection of one's humanity, or the experience of sadness, very rarely is this incorporated into games, and even less so successfully. Greek dramaturgy is the genesis of this thought process, in their idea of catharsis. The reason that we enjoy experiencing high drama is because those negative emotions that we recognize in a character become purged in us, making us feel a positive emotion. But with games, this manifests itself in a very different way. I'd like to use a specific example for how to illustrate this. The first time that my wife played through Dark Souls 3, she reached the final boss, the Soul of Cinder. Now, to summarize the impact of this boss, it's an amalgamation of every single person that's ever been in the same position as your protagonist. Every character that attempted to prolong this dying world for some faint glimmer of hope, and they have been metastasized into this final entity. And so you defeat the boss, but then something happens. His demeanor changes, his moveset changes, and then the music changes. In a final dying act, the collective suffering of the world coalesces back to its starting point as the Soul of Cinder adopts the persona of Gwyn, the final boss of the first game, and the cause for all of this anguish. A tragic and fallen character re-emerges, trapped in a body of ash. The story ends as it began. All you have to do is kill once more the desperate man that began this cycle. It's a deeply emotional moment, as the mood shifts from heroic to outright trauma. And when my wife played this and got to this moment for the first time, she continued as much as she could, until she accepted that she couldn't, because she was crying. She had to accept that she wasn't going to make it. Now for me, this is the perfect anecdote to illustrate catharsis in video games, because although she experienced an incredibly deep emotional response, which is what the game wanted to evoke, it had to be embodied differently to how we experience other art for catharsis. In order to truly experience that emotion, she had to have a moment of reflection, remove herself from the act of playing in order to reach it, because catharsis requires a degree of introspection, whereas playing a game requires engagement. The same way as in a high-intensity situation, your body is numb to feeling until after the adrenaline wears off and you start to feel pain. Emotion works similarly with games. You're hyper-focused on the goal orientation of the control that you're seemingly able to bypass the actual emotional catharsis. In essence, the two states of being are mutually exclusive of one another, or at the very least, they can't entirely overlap. The moment the process of playing actually evokes those emotions is the moment it stops being fun. The benefit of this, however, is that other thrilling emotions, like enjoyment or fear, may even be amplified through the gaming experience. But again, this merely exemplifies the need that games need to be fun. Another example is in one of the greater meditations on the nature of video games in Spec Ops: The Line.
This is Colonel John Conrad, United States Army. Evacuation of Dubai ended in complete failure. Death toll, too many.
Spec Ops is a commentary on the abundance of military shooters in video games and the dissonance that this employs between player and protagonist. Firstly, by not removing the genuine hardship of war and displaying the severity of PTSD, severely separated itself from the majority of military shooters. Secondly, it employed US soldiers as the enemy, rather than the typical foreign insurgents, humanizing them more to people that have a similar history as the protagonist, and most likely, the player. And lastly, there's the complete deconstruction of the metagame narrative. Loading screens begin to address your actions in a less than complimentary fashion, calling you by name directly, and the illusion of choice becomes a major facet of the game's storytelling.
You're fucking kidding, right? That's white phosphorus.
Yeah, I know what it is.
You've seen what this shit does. You know we
We might
can't
not have a
use it.
choice, Lugo.
There's always a choice.
No, there's really not.
The game asks, does the player have a responsibility in their actions morally? Can a game of this kind express itself ethically? And what would happen if the player simply stopped? All of these questions are superbly explored within the game. However, it actually does manage a catharsis through gameplay, because Spec Ops: The Line disguises itself as the contemporaries that it's critiquing. As a result, the actual gameplay is rather lackluster. It copies many tropes of its genre: large turret sections, a simple cover system, a rather uninteresting weapon selection, because you're essentially going through the motions in order for Spec Ops to convey its themes. You have to feel the lifelessness of its gameplay, as that is what it aims to deliver. Killing people for entertainment, maybe, shouldn't be fun.
There were over 5,000 people alive in Dubai the day before you arrived. How many are alive today, I wonder? How many will be alive tomorrow? I thought my duty was to protect this city from the storm. I was wrong. I have to protect it from you.
Or at the very least, if you're aiming to evoke something deeper, it can definitely cause moral ambiguity. Because if the gameplay was fun, and it became a joy to kill your enemies to the point that you wanted to do it more, then its commentary would fall apart. So ultimately, if a game aims to achieve catharsis, it must reduce its degree of engagement, where games either resort to full-on cutscenes or minimizing gameplay via holding a direction to move. Or you can focus on the mechanics and attempt to weave a story in the middle of it. Because engagement is what instills those feelings of fun, and sometimes it can be the very idea of fun or entertainment which can reduce one's perception of a piece artistically. But with games, this is less so. The mechanics of how we measure the quality of a film are different to the mechanics measured for the quality of a video game. Although the concept of fun is subjective, there are certain parameters by which games can be objectively measured as successful, as games can be exclusively measured by their technical aspects. And if certain aspects of art weren't objective, then we wouldn't be seeing general agreements to what is good and what isn't. To make a comparison, if a film had the right intention and was able to give a deep emotional resonance in certain elements, but it was shot terribly, had obnoxious editing that interfered tonally, then it would by many counts be a failure. The technical aspects are a part of the artistic process, and virtuosity within those technical feats do enhance the art, but pure technical skill will never be art. Just as the drawing of a realistic portrait is not considered high art, even though it could be argued that the style offers the greatest representation of real life. Pure technique is not equated with art. Yet in the realm of video games, the better one's technical aspects are, the better it succeeds at being a game, regardless of its artistic input. Like we said earlier, individual experience trumps design for most games. The way that games are read first and foremost are as a vessel of entertainment.
If it's not fun, why bother? If it's not a battle, Where's the fun?
If a game is fun, then it's achieved one of the medium's highest appraisals. And a game can be fun with no traditional artistic reference whatsoever and still be perceived as a pinnacle of the art form. Tetris is just a game. Outside of the player experience, there's no great philosophical questioning, no great degree of introspection. Of course, every experience offers something, and you can expand on this by saying it artistically evokes achievement, exhilaration, and how those experiences relate to one's memory. But ultimately, in regards to traditional artistic relevance, Tetris doesn't fall into that category, yet it equally can still be defined as a masterpiece. It's one of the few video games on display at the Museum of Modern Art. To make another comparison, to show the difference in our perception of games to the other art forms, if Tetris had an equivalent in cinema, then it would be a film with beautiful cinematography and presentation, nuanced sound design, and so on. And it would be a film whose narrative and thematics are completely negligible. I can't envision a world in which merely the technical skill of an artwork is the primary function. The majority of art that we've curated throughout history is because of its emotional resonance, and it's been bolstered by its unique skill and virtuosity. Video games are quite literally the opposite way round. Feats of technical prowess that are bolstered by their good thematic and emotional resonance. And again, it all comes down to the fact that video games still have to be fun. What this can result in is a medium focused too much on the surface element, where design emerges without imagination or a sense of the human behind them. They essentially become a paint-by-numbers affair in which everything works, but exactly as you'd expect it to. Because the medium becomes so technically based, then there's a much more set way of making a game good. Much like large corporate blockbusters, games can take elements from many other games that became staples of the genre. In fact, games are often more defined and limited by genre than any other medium. Resident Evil 4 emerges and becomes the staple for the perspective of third-person action, and so many games that follow copy its blueprint. Dark Souls inadvertently creates an entire genre which people lift directly from over a decade later. Many AAA titles ultimately take the pre-existing elements of video games, an enticing crafting system, clean precise movement without room for error, and an exploration of the world that never feels too empty or too overwhelming. Place some towers to uncover the map, have a simplified stealth system, and what you have is a perfect system that has no surprise to it whatsoever. It's why people like Dark Souls so much from a purely technical level. There's so much detail and variability within its combat system, from the minor details of equipment and how that changes gameplay, to the precision of the hitboxes which allows for a deep understanding of what does and doesn't work. But the thing is, the entire system of Dark Souls was so unique to it. Prior to it, there was no system that incorporated this kind of dodge mechanic, the maneuverability from targeted to non-targeted combat, the difference in speed and weight of both weapons and character. Every element feels specifically crafted for this world, whereas many others simply employ crafting systems because they know that they've been implemented in previously successful games. So they feel as though they've been copied and pasted across the board because they have. And yet even these games, which have far less innovation, will still be considered, to a certain degree, good. But good game mechanics surely would result in a fun experience, seeing as how defining a mechanic as good would result it in becoming more competent in the realm of video games, therefore, as a game, making it feel more fun. Feeling as though the player has no control of the events that occur in front of them, that the rules of the game world being inconsistent, player inputs not matching what occurs in front of them beyond a reasonable point, these would be things that would definitely not be considered fun, and so games simply have to avoid this. But if genre were not such a defining factor of a video game, would games look like this? I'm more inclined to believe that game developers like Swery are the closest thing that we have to an active outsider artist within the medium of games. And this is simply because all convention is discarded in order to make individual experiences. And I would much rather have a collection of unique expressions for games, rather than the cookie-cutter reliance on pre-established franchises and remakes using pre-existing systems which are as functional as to the point that their heart is ripped out of them. Sometimes form over functionality can result in very interesting works of art.
F.K. in the coffee. I knew I could count on it. Never fails.
And this reliance on fun means that there results an innate dichotomy between the level of interaction and the serious themes that a piece of art aims to employ. We can assume that most players will be in the role of the protagonist, in which case the major plot points will be resolved by the player. This means that there has to be a synthesis between the moral and ethical choices of the player and those same choices of the character. However, this restricts the nature of what the protagonist of a game can be if we are to instill those feelings within the player. Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov is able to follow the first-person perspective of a man attracted to a child. Could you even conceive of a video game attempting to employ a perspective such as this? Ultimately, these types of games are made, but they're very specifically transgressions of the genre. One of the more notable examples being Super Columbine Massacre RPG, in which players actually take the role of the Columbine shooters through an exploration of media influence and violence in video games. The end result is a very thought-provoking and interesting divergence on the video game formula. But again, precisely because of this, its aim is not to be fun, rather a different kind of perspective, one that only video games can be. I don't necessarily believe that all video games need to be fun, but I definitely don't believe in the opposite either. I also think that this establishes a binary within the medium wherein either focusing purely on the mechanics results in a very artificial and shallow experience, although an experience which is incredibly entertaining, or alternatively, that the experience itself isn't particularly satisfying, but does pose interesting avenues of thought. There are instances in which gameplay serves as an accurate portrayal of what appears on screen. I think of something simple like the Lone Wolf mission in Halo Reach. I just feel as though video games are primarily something that we enjoy, but I do also enjoy the deeply resonant experience of Silent Hill 2, even though it may not necessarily be fun. Ultimately, each game is going to offer differing experiences, and I think that each of those experiences should attempt to rekindle the catharsis through the player via its design. Games are essentially tests of one's own dexterity, and although I said that we don't seek out certain emotional states to play, we inadvertently experience them in a unique way through the game design. Resident Evil makes us choose whether to run or shoot as opposed to having both as an option. The developments in linguistics is how you gradually learn the language of Tunic, to the simple inclusion of a grip meter in Shadow of the Colossus. These are instances of a synthesis between player and character that allow for a closer representation between the two. Systems that don't simply evoke fun, and yet in our mastery of these systems, which is an innate object in our goal-oriented mindset, we may finally achieve catharsis while the game retains the emotional and thematic conveyance. We're always, in our own ways, working to make the game more fun simply by mastering it. And so if the design prioritizes cathartic elements, a la Dark Souls, Breath of the Wild, and Eternal Darkness, then I believe that the prioritization of games only as a form of escapism may be conquered. But as to talk about the third and most systemic point on the operations of video games, is that like every other medium, games are insular to the industry in which they operate. And the basic practices of games in their industry seem to do far more harm than good. The game industry unfortunately seems to just place barriers in the way of genuine innovation, and yet they engorge games as a whole that I can really only discuss the damage that they do. More than any other medium, video games have a shelf life. There's the obvious hindrance of video games only being able to be played on old, or in some cases archaic hardware, because as we said, video games are intertwined with their technology. But for many, they're trapped on a single console, which if you don't have, you can't experience. Imagine if old films were only possible to be screened on a 1950s television. The fact is, once video games hit a certain age, they become nearly impossible relics to hunt for. Video game archivism has yet to reach a sophisticated enough level where we can protect games from being lost and allow people to experience them. As once most of them hit a certain point, Rather than finding ways of continuing a mainstream distribution, they're remastered in an attempt to make the original obsolete. But there's also the case that many games have a literal shelf life. Some games are online only, and when those servers are gone, those games disappear forever. The same's to be said for games with downloadable content, or entire games themselves that exist on specific stores, and when those stores are closed, those games are gone. Something that was just of its time, a product, something to be consumed as a passing piece of entertainment. This tells us that games are comparable to an art or industry like that of fashion. It's reliant on the new trends and being cutting edge for a brief period until its time has passed, and then it's only relevant for those collectors. It's a world built on rabid consumerism with a handful of auteurs that people would like to bring up to legitimize the medium. It's a surprise to me that for the highest grossing entertainment industry, with such an evidently passionate fanbase, there's not much effort in the protection of the works that people seem to love so much. Games that will disappear forever, some of which are made just a few years prior, doomed to a minuscule life cycle. This doesn't sound like how people should treat art. And so this is the foundation that makes it such an enigma of how we view video games. But I also believe that these things can be reconciled. If there were to simply be employed a quality measure of archiving, wherein games were not locked down to a single system, or alternatively, make backwards compatibility universal, so if you own a game, you can still operate it on newer pieces of hardware, then the majority of the industry treatment of games is nullified. But as things stand, this will only further the argument that games will never be treated as art. We've spoken about the mechanics and logistics that games operate in, and there's probably more things I haven't discussed here than I have. I understand that in many ways, games are still a birthing medium, and one who is more reliant on technological evolution than most. Although again, I believe that in order to make a successful game, you don't necessarily need more evolved technology. Otherwise, all games of the past would become obsolete, and there would be no space for simplicity in games, which if anything, seems to be what more people are drawn to. Games as an art on the mechanical level is achievable. It would simply take a reassessing of what it is that the art of video games has to offer, and perhaps a keener eye from the player on what they're receiving from it. Is it just passive entertainment, or something more? And perhaps we should raise our standards slightly to synthesize both worlds, of virtuous creativity and unbridled artistry, which should segue us very nicely into our second category, the art of video games. Games as an experiential piece, games as storytelling. These are the two domains in which video games seem to operate, and the ideal being at the intersection where both of these two states of being overlap. That is what separates a piece of art from a piece of entertainment. If we were to discuss the pinnacle of what an individual video game has achieved so far, what would happen if it were to be measured alongside other mediums of art? We've yet to find a game that could measure in importance to the likes of the Sistine Chapel, the Divine Comedy, Citizen Kane, and so on. There are a variety of reasons for this. One of the simplest is time. Video games are still a new art form, one of the newest as a matter of fact. Coupling this with the fact that the development of video games are tied to the developments of technologies, and the mass influx over time makes it far more difficult to discern what will achieve the status as a classic and retain it. Then there's the added element of general perception. Although people are more open to the idea of video games as an art form, a general canon can only truly be formed by some type of collective agreement. The same reason that Ishmael and Hamlet remain characters among the pantheon of literature is not exclusively limited to the fact that their stories they hail from are considered important. They're considered important also because of their historical significance. And you'd have to say that as a generalization, most generations that have preceded video games have not looked upon the medium with the openness to such an idea. Video games have thus remained in the realm of a pastime, perhaps even an interesting hobby, but not within the conversation of art. Yet most of these are external factors that are a byproduct of the medium of video games themselves. But we must come to what I believe to be the most damaging element of why video games are difficult to talk about, and perhaps the main reason why they're not seen as art. Examining the general attitude and discourse around the medium of video games, you'll be exposed to the largest chasm in any artistic medium towards reference to high art. I've stated many times before that the natural growth of the human species is to build upon what came before it. You need to have read Shakespeare to understand where we've come as humans. But in the realm of video games is where this discourse, sadly, is at its lowest.
Did I just do that?
Well, definitely with my assistance.
I did not just do that.
We did.
I just moved shit with my mind.
We can justify this if we examine games as a purely mechanistically fueled medium. The craft of the majority of video game development is based in coding and design. You don't necessarily need an artistic or storytelling background to create a great game. Super Mario Bros. Might still be seen as the one video game that brought games into households and showed just how much of a cultural shift they'd be. But what story did it aim to tell? A princess is missing and the hero must save her. Repeat 8 times, and then she thanks him. Now there's nothing wrong with archetypical storytelling. The hero's journey has been implemented across a variety of stories throughout human history. However, we have to say it for what it is. Much like how there are ways to design a game mechanically that you know work, the same can be said for telling a story. Without any kind of transgression or innovation of new methods of storytelling, you meet the same beats and cliches that make the story work, except it then becomes rather uninspired. However, games like Mario never needed this, and the series can still be in many ways perceived as one of the pinnacles of the medium for its mechanics and design, because that is the major goal of the people creating games. Their skills don't need to be aligned with artistic reference, because they're designers and coders. Their goal was to create something fun for people to play. The people creating games do not need an extensive reference of art in order to create a game, which means that the players also don't need such a reference in order to understand the creators. But this has set a precedent for how games are read by players. For so long, it's never needed to be a medium in which artistic reference was required, and so over the years, that's how it's developed. Now, I'm not claiming that you necessarily need to have the exact same level of understanding that an artist has when examining their creations. However, it certainly helps in comprehending their works the more knowledge that you have in that field. If you've played Metal Gear Solid 5, you may have a deeper appreciation for the game if you know its similarities to Moby Dick. You can enjoy the game without that reference, but it certainly helps by being closer to the artist's perspective. Without that reference, you can only delve so far. But some may think that creating a video game is an intrinsically artistic endeavour. It requires 3D modelers, concept artists, and so on. Absolutely. The same way that film needs to run on a crew of people that are specialists within their fields. However, for most projects, although they're collaborative, they're typically tied to one creative vision. If that creative vision is too inept or shallow, then the end result is something subpar, especially considering the level of talent that's around them. And in video games, we still unfortunately have not bypassed the hard truth that many of them are made from a juvenile perspective. Now, this isn't to be prudish or dismissive. Again, I think there's incredible creativity in the Mario games, and I've played and enjoyed them numerous times. I want to establish that there's a great difference between something being family friendly, something designed with children in mind, and something being immature. Hayao Miyazaki creates some of the grandest masterpieces in animation, and he creates them specifically with children in mind. However, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone that would call these works immature. But this isn't a criticism of whether games are or aren't for children. People have played games throughout history in a variety of different ways, and within video games there are many that have a deep complexity. Of course, sometimes people must consider that perhaps what they engage with shouldn't be so consistently tied to the work of children, but I'm not primarily speaking of this. When I speak of immaturity, I'm more often speaking to those pieces that are not directed towards children. Grand Theft Auto 4 is a fantastically written character study about the criminal underworld workings of multicultural America. Grand Theft Auto 5 is an attempt at satire that obnoxiously points at a big silly word and calls it parody.
Some big stars, some beautiful dresses. We're gonna see some side boob tonight. Come on.
Sunset Overdrive is a fun game, but the moment it attempts to write comedic dialogue, it consists of stating the thing, repeating that yeah, that's actually the thing, and then an awkward declaration of how weird that was. This is a juvenile perspective, because this is your art reflecting your reference. A character saying something sarcastic, like that something is good when it's not, is typically not a very astute observation. It's cheap and it's lazy. And sadly, this runs the gamut in video games. Your technique is tied to your reference. Again, you may be an artist or an illustrator with incredible skill. However, if the only images that you can recall from memory are poorly written comic books, fan art, and other video games of that caliber, then your technique can only take you so far. And so for most games, they're resigned to avoiding the difficult themes and stick to what they know. Be fun. But to be honest, I would often rather this be the case, because one of the main issues with video game writing is most highlighted when they try to be artistic.
You'll see, it's really simple. It's kind of like a video game. Have you ever played a video game, Mrs. Morrison?
No.
It doesn't matter. You're gonna do fine.
Now I'm going to be very blunt and objective in this section, and although I don't know exactly why this happened, I'll attempt to explore some of the reasons and theories behind my statements. The fact of the matter is that when you measure the writing of the average video game against any other medium, the level is so bad. It's terrible. It's cringe-inducing. And this is taking the so-called pinnacles of video game storytelling. Compared to the eloquent prose and depth of character that permeate Disco Elysium, Life is Strange looks like the ramblings of a psychopath, jumping from one awful decision to the next and justifying it armed only with the weapon of confusion.
This song fucking rules. Can't dance, hippie? Come on. Rock out, girl. Yes, break it down, Max.
And this is the case for a lot of games. And it's also the case because writing for a video game is far more different than writing for any other medium. It should probably be stated that the idea for writing a video game seems like an incredibly difficult task. Not only do you need to consider the pacing of what you're writing and how that may be reached at different times by different people, you also have to balance the game design and locales with the story itself. Two separate teams attempting to find a synthesis with one another with how the story progresses. The design of video game levels serve like chapters to a story, and then it's the writer's job to find how they all interconnect. This isn't an easy task, it's a constant balancing act. But even removing that unique facet of writing for a video game, the basic principles of good writing, character depth, thought-provoking dialogue, inciting incidents and how they interplay with one another, even these basics are done so poorly, there's no way I would anticipate the more complex things to be done well.
At that moment, I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. All I could do was replay the scene of her being pulled into obscurity by nothing. There 1 second and gone the next.
It just looks like games can't write good dialogue. Their characters are dull. Their ways of propelling the narrative feel like excuses. And a lot of this stems back to video games as a fun medium. When you're trying to make something fun and enjoyable, it's often it ends with things becoming cohesive. But when the game is fun, we tend to give it a pass. It also doesn't help that a lot of people who claim that video games are an avenue for unique forms of sophisticated and mature storytelling don't do the medium any favours by choosing to play the garbage that gives the medium the very reputation they aim to avoid at all costs. Again, I truly believe that if you go and read works like Blood Meridian, things like Oxenfree will stop seeming so impactful. There's so little genuine discourse at a high level across the medium. I rarely tend to mention contemporaries that I feel offer something to a medium. However, games are in dire need of that. And so I feel that someone like Joseph Anderson is able to dissect a video game with care and attention, and someone like Matthew Matosis is the closest that I can conceive of someone with a depth of writing that coincides with his knowledge as a legitimate video game theorist. So if you are to give some people your attention, give it to them. Now I know that large negatives have been spotlighted, so let's move to the opposite end of the spectrum. When it comes to a piece of generational art to emerge from the medium, the general consensus points to Dark Souls and the works of Hidetaka Miyazaki and From Software. I also wouldn't necessarily refute this. Just their influence alone may be enough to instantly place them near the top of the canon of video games. However, from an artistic perspective, these are aesthetic achievements. And though I know that that word is wrongly overused nowadays, I mean aesthetic in the sense of the great tradition. To me, Miyazaki's work stands alongside the work of any artist, and people often point to these works when referring to games that are staples of games as art. But how does one declare something as artistic if one has no reference in the arts? The works of From Software and Miyazaki, to me, are the equivalent of the works from the Renaissance or The Godfather. It's something that's so immediately recognizable in its greatness, even by those unfamiliar with the medium. A person completely illiterate in images can enjoy The Godfather, even if at its heart they're unable to comprehensively read the images in front of them. The average person that doesn't understand how cinematography, montage, and the language of cinema works can still see that The Godfather is a masterpiece. It's the same with the artistry of Dark Souls. Many know it's good, but they can't explain the sheer depth of why. It's not that I don't think Dark Souls deserves the praise, I just feel that the praise it deserves needs to be deeper. To me, it's such a shame when I see the limit of the reference of these games fall as shallow as Berserk. And that's not to say Berserk also isn't a high form of art, but again, much reference to that method of storytelling is also lost. Never considering cinema, animation, art technique, poetry, architecture, and the array of inspiration that they draw from, that is their true understanding of art. That's the real reason why these games shine, because they have a mastery of approach that many games just don't, and it's such a shame that this passes by so many people unnoticed. It's the reason why most of their imitators can't capture its magic, because while From Software is drawing from a deep well of artistic reference, the others are just drawing from Dark Souls.
Mind you, the mantle of Lord interests me none. The fire-linking curse, the legacy of lords, let it all fade into nothing. You've done quite enough. Now have your rest.
It makes you think that many of the people designing or writing games don't even consider the form they're using to tell their story. They're telling a story that just happens to be a game. I'd like to show a statement from Robert Kurvitz, the creator behind Disco Elysium. He said CRPGs are an incredibly modern idea, but for me they're a modern tool, and mutually complementary approaches to literature and storytelling that completely blow linear storytelling out of the water. This is an instance of someone utilizing the medium to its benefit. Rather than crafting a linear perspective within a video game, the narrative of the video game unfolds precisely as and how you choose to explore, with an array of choices all fantastically written. He's making a story that can only be exclusively told in this medium. But compare that to any other story from most games. They can most likely be told in any format. They're not exclusively tied to that interactivity, and quite frankly, the designers and creators probably haven't even considered that this would be an issue at all. It's just a story, and you just happen to be controlling the main character. This is because the pinnacle that a game can achieve now is to be cinematic. The irony of games celebrated for their cinematic qualities to me is absurd. As though just the detail of taking elements from traditional cinematography, employing visual spectacle through less conventional camera angles, is supposed to make the art form richer. All it does is display the dichotomy, in that they had to stray further from their medium's tenets to tell their story. Their story is a film shoved into a game.
All right. Well, hello, friends and fans. It's beyond awesome to have you guys all back this year. First off, I gotta say, I am super excited to welcome all my pals back to the annual Blackwood Winter Getaway.
How many huge AAA titles have you seen that have been described simultaneously as walking simulators and cinematic. You wouldn't call a sculpture cinematic, just as it wouldn't be perceived as a heightened compliment if you thought of a painting like a video game. All you're really saying is that it's disguising itself as another medium by hiding the flaws of its own. Most of the time, this is done to help with the writing, so that they can tell a cinematic story, as it has less logistic complexity than a video game story. Then you result in the hyperlinear Uncharted games, which are spectacles in and of themselves, but I wouldn't think of them as bastions of an interactive medium. And sadly, when the story is legitimately good, most of the time, it comes from the source of all good stories, literature. Those games, the ones that are constantly pointed towards as examples of good storytelling, most of them are adaptations. Spec Ops, Bioshock, The Witcher, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Not all, but many games seem to have a lack of originality when creating a story. There seems to be a clear disconnect between the writing and design of video games, especially as the reliance on larger scopes in games is paradoxically requiring more siphoned manners of development. So the result for the rest of them is to make stories inspired by what they know best. Pretty mediocre films. And so ends my diatribe on the quality of artistic reference in video games. Although this isn't exclusive to this medium, I wouldn't hesitate to say that it's in this art form that it's most damaging for its growth. There isn't much to say beyond this other than people that play and make games need to traverse out of this juvenile stage and deepen their understanding of other arts. And just to ensure that this isn't a claim that things can't be foolish and fun, games like the Persona series and the works of Platinum Games, I want these to exist. I like that these exist. It would just benefit the medium if the opposite could exist alongside it. Because as of now, the references have less to do with the journey of Odysseus. Instead, they're inspired by Marvel. And although many would say that these are the mythical beings and references of our time, yeah, but they're wrong. When we talk about art, what springs to mind? Odds are it's the Mona Lisa, or perhaps a litany of those culturally significant paintings, the ones that everybody knows. High art. Perhaps it's a combination of the figures, who even if you aren't familiar with their work, you know their stature and their frame. Beethoven, Shakespeare, Da Vinci. They're entities tied to eternity, both isolated to a point in time, yet universal to all of humanity. Sadly, video games don't seem to carry that weight. Video games are tied to the now, particularly at the time I'm creating this essay. I mentioned earlier that they're similar to fashion, in that they need to service the needs of now. What are the new trends? How can we capitalize on the current market? How do we not miss our chance? When anything is created like that, or at the least prioritizes this kind of thinking, it almost instantly removes it from any kind of artistic process. At that point, it's a product first, that just happens to have some artistic people on board. It's content. This in many ways returns us to the practices of video games, but from a more current climate. We've seen a monetization process surreptitiously integrate with games over the last decade, to the point that the very industry itself appears to be a gnat's breadth away from collapsing. When a film is created, sometimes certain sacrifices are made so that the film can return a profit to those that help financially in making it a reality. Crossover promotions, clever marketing, product placements. I don't think that films or any art should put a dent in the pockets of those that help facilitate it. However, the truth is that many of the people who do fund these projects don't care about the content. It's just a matter of their return. And the same goes for games. Games, like cinema, are being made with ludicrously large budgets and need to make a return. That's fine. However, I'm inclined to believe that this has become less about making a return and more about using games as a front for money gouging. If for the player, games have to be fun, then for the studio, games have to make a profit. And the tragedy is that the hyper-monetization of video games in their most recent iteration absolutely annihilate any other form of predatory consumer practices across any format. Locked out content on a game disc encourages people to pay extra for that which they technically already own. Battle passes say that those who pay more for the game deserve more, regardless of how much they enjoy the game, their skill level, or their time spent with it. The lack of quality, wherein games are encouraged not to be fully completed or even in a functional state upon their launch. Unfortunately, I have to mention that this wasn't always the case. Games used to prioritize their quality, as good reviews and word of mouth was the best way a game could hope to sell well. However, now that there are avenues of making a game a live service or something wherein there's no such thing as a completed product, have enabled new ugly practices that are implemented time and time again. If people were not to buy into this, then the market would dictate that these things stop. However, as I said, video games are also a consumable product, and sadly the majority of people engaging with it are not art enthusiasts, they're consumers. So sadly, as easy as it is to see a solution to this, I'm pessimistic in people's inability to avoid their appetite for material need. So although this is more of a tangent on the quality of video games as games, I think it should be highlighted to show just how much time and effort is put into this area of production. If the foundation for art and creativity is collaboration and conceptualization, then so much time is diverted away from that into these practices which are exclusively in the domain of business. And as the area grows and grows, it just seems that games are evolving into a pastime, which there's nothing wrong with. It would just be a shame if that pastime were co-opted by the greedy corporate types as everything else is nowadays. But then again, what else do you really expect? So here I am, attempting to treat games as art. But is this me attempting to force a square peg into a round hole? Is my perspective one that's not shared by most people? Do people want games to be more than they are? We're placing video games within an isolated sphere, but are they just one branch of games, rather than a branch of the arts? Maybe they're both. Maybe some games have the potentiality for art, but maybe they're just a form of escapism, and perhaps some of them do it better than others. And it's our subjective perceptions and interpretations of those experiences that ring true. Maybe subjectivity is the cornerstone of video games, which makes it difficult to slot into the more objective world of art. So then, they're games. Like hide and seek is a game, or like chess is a game. But they're not really the same thing, are they? Some would say that there is an art to chess, although the correct way to express it is that there is an intensely honed and constantly shifting craft to chess, one in which a player is constantly adapting between offense and defense, like Pong. Games have existed for millennia, and it seems that the art for most of them is in the mechanics of the puzzle solving. They're an alternative to sports, although sport too is a game, and all of them can be enjoyed exclusively at the spectator level. But we have this idea that when someone achieves a level of proficiency in that craft, we call them an artist. There's a documentary of footballer Zinedine Zidane titled Zidane, a 21st Century Portrait. All it is a regular league game by Zidane while he's playing for Real Madrid, yet filmed in a manner that it seems to act more as an art installation than a man playing a game of football. One game among the hundreds that he played, nothing particularly special or memorable about it, and yet when observed through this lens, it almost transcends the game itself. A human being reaching the peak of his medium, one to inspire others to new avenues once thought impossible. Isn't this the very nature of art? To expose the transcendental, to offer new avenues of thought. People that play games, people that partake in sport, perhaps only a few can reach this pinnacle, wherein the craft transposes into something more. Yet, they are the ones we remember. We curate their legacy within their own medium when we transcribe the history of humanity. Ancient Rome did modern culture the service of curating the works of the ancient Greeks, and perhaps once the dust is settled, that may be the same for all mediums. Video games are primarily a tool for passive entertainment, and perhaps it's the art that is the exception. And yet once time has passed, and we have to choose those that we canonize, those that spoke to something deeper within us, maybe then is the legacy and the importance truly revealed to us. Just as not every athlete is remembered for being great, just as not every film touches you to your soul, not every game is worthy of discussion. And although I'd argue that this is the case for most games, I may even argue that this is the case for most things. Perhaps games should be treated as art from the get-go. Maybe all I'm really calling for is a more acute eye to those things that are truly valuable, those things that we should offer more appreciation to while we have the opportunity to experience them in the present before they become a relic of the past. They are out there. We just need to celebrate them while we still have the chance.
What can change the nature of a man?
When I was originally thinking of this essay, I started with the idea of why don't video games have their own Dostoevsky? We've established a medium wherein a game director is now seen as a creative auteur rather than just a designer. Yu Suzuki, Hideo Kojima, Suda51, Itsushi Inaba. Regardless of what you feel about their approaches in relation to video games, it's clear that these are people that have a singular and unique vision outsider to traditional video game design that gives their work a character and flair so idiosyncratic that they can't be mistaken for anyone else. Individual creations such as this may be the building blocks needed in order to reach the point that there will emerge someone from the medium that can comfortably reach the level of a Dostoevsky. The fact of the matter is that most mediums are not made up of their Dostoevskys, or their Shakespeares, or their Tarkovskys. But perhaps we should refocus and make those our priority, and truly assess the level of those things we interact with. Silent Hill 2, Metal Gear Solid Sons of Liberty, Disco Elysium, Planescape Torment, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. These are the games that I would not hesitate to place among any other piece of high art, and I encourage people to treat them as such. It's very easy to overstate the impact artistically that many games have, but it's equally as simple to downplay the importance that these games can have. They're some of the most well-written, deeply transgressive works of art that I've ever encountered, and they would easily be at home standing side by side with a Dostoevsky. The diversity of what a game can be is so amazing to me. The fact that within cinema, we can distinguish between narrative and art cinema. In the medium of video games, you have games that may not even be games. Simulators that serve as one-for-one replicas of intensely complex systems, from piloting an aircraft to building and operating a rocket. And then you can go completely off course and look at things like Dushin the Giant and Aquanaut's Holiday, with no definitive purpose to what the goal of the game is, to LSD Dream Simulator, in which the rules of the game are tied to some loose idea so that the player can traverse these psychedelic experiences. Even after all this, the fact that every definition that I gave to games could easily be dismantled or refuted with another example just makes me excited for the innumerable possibilities that the medium can offer. I would like to see the corporatization of the industry collapse, but then I'd also like that for the monopolization of cinema and the hyperinflation of pricing in the fine arts. This isn't exclusive to video games, but the potential for the medium is so high, I would hate to see it fall so short so soon. I don't typically think of leaving with a final conclusion for this essay, as the very definition of games we've realised to be such a tenuous thing, and their sprawling and diverse nature suggests to me that we've only scratched the surface of the art form. But even with everything that I've critiqued, I do still perceive it as an art form. Even if I believe that for it to achieve its absolute potential, a complete rethink and reform has to occur on the part of both creators and players. For those that partake in the medium of games, measure it as you would a painting, analyse its artistic integrity, and don't be afraid to be critical. Critique is the bedrock of legitimate progress in any form. You pick things apart now so that we may avoid them in the future, so you can carve a divine path for the medium to hopefully build upon. Take time to evaluate its intentions and measure it against the principles of storytelling and thematics that you've encountered throughout humanity. There should be no reason as to why a game cannot be measured against the work of a Dostoevsky. If it could be better, treat it as such. And lastly, but most importantly, elevate your reference so that you're better equipped to dissect what's in front of you. Raising your own level only encourages those around you to raise theirs. And of course, to the designers, don't diminish the incredible medium it is that you're working with. This isn't film, nor is it clay, nor marble. This is something unique that you have to figure out the tools at your disposal to morph. Discover something within its form that nobody has done before and nobody outside of your medium could do. Games are fun, and though they may tell you otherwise, art is too. Treat games as art.